So we're basically looking at the environment around financing the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're seeing the sort of volume of commitments that the IFIs, the DFIs, the multilateral development banks, this kind of alphabet soup of entities, are allocating towards supporting private sector development. And it makes perfect sense to us that the private sector has a valuable role to play. We're basically asking what are the most effective and fair financial instruments, contracts, to use in order to incentivize those returns. Looking at the kind of landscape of contracts, we can decrease risk through tools like political risk insurance. We can increase returns using subsidies, conditional subsidies. And we think that of the contracts that are available, of the things we could use, conditional subsidies that pay out on success should be a much bigger part of this financing story than they currently are. When we looked into this, we thought that the data would be a lot more easily available. In fact, part of the problem is that development finance institutions and banks are relying heavily on guarantees and other instruments that are really hard to score. So it's really hard to evaluate what the real cost of a guarantee is because we don't know what the probability is that it will be called, that it will go into default. But they're relying very heavily on the traditional tools, which is concessional lending, just subsidies on the cost of borrowing, and on guarantees, which is a subsidy on risk. A guarantee says if the investor defaults, the development finance institution, basically taxpayers, will step in and carry the cost of their default. And those are the kind of dominant instruments at the moment. We think that there have been many good examples of subsidies that have the same cost as guarantees or unconditional subsidies, but only pay out when the investor performs the service that we're looking to incentivize, whether it's education or building out infrastructure or producing vaccines. I think that maybe even 50 years ago, perhaps even less, we would have had a hard time generating consensus in a room like this that the private sector has this unique and valuable role to play. But as a thought experiment, we can kind of tell that the public sector, though it could do everything, probably shouldn't do everything. And there's a weird mishmash of things the private sector brings to the table. It's a combination of risk appetite, it's a combination of management know-how, it's an ability to experiment, fail, and try something new that perhaps makes private sector investment unique. And a really good example of this is spending on education. So I think maybe a decade ago, the consensus was we had to put a lot of money through public education systems. And that has not really realized the kinds of returns we were hoping for. And we can keep trying to do the same thing, which is public expenditure to achieve the same objectives. Or we can assume that the private sector might have a valuable and unique role to play. And even if we don't know exactly why that is, and RCTs can help us get to the bottom of that, we should probably be spending more money through the private sector in a way that aligns our incentives with theirs. Let's see educational returns rather than just educational investment.